You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. There is quite a bit to get to, and boy, are we ready to cover it all here. There were a lot of acts of violence over the weekend, including the arson attack on the governor's residence in Pennsylvania. Democrat Governor Josh Shapiro and his family had to be evacuated. There was a series of Molotovs that were thrown into the Pennsylvania governor's residence, just completely destroying what is a very beautiful interior. And the response initially was, of course, because Governor Josh Shapiro is on the political left, although one of the more moderate members, at least as far as moderates on the Democratic side of the aisle can be. The response was that, this had to be some type of super deep MAGA Trump supporter who did this. And that wasn't the case. In fact, it turned out to be an individual by the name of Cody Balmer. Here's the little bit of the description on his arrest.
We have, as the Colonel indicated, Cody Balmer is in custody. We are preparing a criminal complaint to charge him. This is not a record yet, but the charges will include attempted murder, terrorism, aggravated arson, and aggravated assault against an enumerated person. These are all very serious charges. As with any charges, the defendant is presumed innocent. We will file those charges within the next several hours, and we will include a probable cause affidavit which will detail the basis for this arrest. I can't give you a lot of details because it won't be of record. I can only give you the charges, but the criminal complaint and the affidavit will detail that further this very day.
So there are a couple of things to note here. Number one, the individual, in case there was a clip of, I should say an image of him next to his family in the video. We cropped that out. Normally I'm not in the habit of cropping videos out, especially when there's a watermark on them. We like to try to give credit to the agency that put that out. And in this case, I think that's the central ABC outlet over in Philadelphia. But the other half of the video was a picture of this guy with like his kids, and we don't like showing kids' faces here on air if we can help it. Now, what about this guy? What does he believe? Well, this guy's nuts. Big shocker there. So this guy is a self-described socialist, and you might say, wait a minute, don't a lot of socialists kind of like Bernie Sanders, aren't they very pro-Democrat? Some of them are, absolutely, and they are definitely on the left side of the aisle, but in many cases, you have socialists who think that the Democratic Party has failed the left, and they are against both parties completely. So Cody posted, he's a registered socialist, he's gotten, he's joked about the number of ballots that he's received, but he basically points out pretty consistently that he doesn't like voting really for either party. A very mentally unstable individual. Trump also responded to this today.
The attacker was not a fan of Trump, I understand, just from what I read and from what I've been told. The attacker basically wasn't a fan of anybody. It's probably just a whack job. And certainly a thing like that cannot be allowed to happen.
Now, that's an appropriate response. The reason I say that's an appropriate response is the second you immediately run out and go, see, it's this person who did it, this person who inspired such incidents and attacks. This is the party response. You get into really hairy territory really quick, because if we're going to go ahead and start claiming individuals for particular political attacks, then you start getting into your side did it, and that makes it really bad. But then when my side does it, well, maybe it was justified. And this is particularly disturbing as it trends over on the left side of the aisle. The individuals in this country right now who are claiming political attacks and are simultaneously tut-tutting and kind of poo-pooing, sure, these things are bad, but, there's a lot of anger in the country, there's a lot of tension, and After all, it's just property. Hey, come on. That's been the attitude and the tone over the firebombed Tesla dealerships and whatnot. But it certainly doesn't stop there for violence over the weekend. A Wisconsin teenager murdered his mother and stepfather to, quote, obtain the financial means and autonomy necessary, end quote, to kill President Trump and overthrow the U.S. government, federal authorities said in court documents, according to the New York Post. Nikita Kasip, 17, was arrested in March and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of hiding a corpse after killing his mother and his stepfather in their Waukesha home. And the horror of this situation is only made worse by the brutality of the murders. Apparently, these 2 individuals were stitched, riddled with bullets. He scrawled all over a bunch of images in his room, a bunch of neo-Nazi rhetoric, Hail Hitler, Hail the white race, Hail victory, a bunch of other insane nonsense. And again, the argument of clinging to political extremism, which excuses violence, is a terribly disgusting thing. And it erodes in this country any semblance of common foundation and therefore any trust in institutional justice whatsoever. Which is why you find people like Taylor Lorenz, who, congratulations on Taylor finally removing the mask. I mean, she was wearing a mask during inauguration when she was running around and trying to intimidate those of us that were at the Power 30 Awards in Washington. Taylor Lorenz decided in an interview with some random dude I've never heard of from CNN, she described Luigi Mangione, the alleged killer of the United Healthcare CEO, as you know, he's just got some really good morals. I mean, hey, come on.
Hilarious to see these millionaire media pundits on TV clutching their pearls about someone standing a murderer when...
By the way that she says that, millionaire pundits on TV clutching their pearls, as the foremost pundit who says pearl clutching every other day, I'm going to go ahead and claim ownership, knowing that Taylor Lorenz follows me. This one's for me. So Taylor, love that you're a fan of the show. Seek help immediately. No, Taylor, by all means, continue.
This is the United States of America, as if we don't lionize criminals, as if we don't have, we don't stand murderers of all sorts, and we give them Netflix shows. There's a huge disconnect between the narratives and angles that sort of mainstream media pushes and what the American public feels. And you see that in moments like this. And I can tell you, I saw the biggest audience growth that I've ever seen, because people were like, oh, some journalist is actually speaking to the anger that we feel.
The women who got her outside court in New York.
So.
Oh, I know that guy. That's Donnie O'Sullivan. Oh, he's going to be important in just a second. Please, Taylor, continue.
You're going to see women especially that feel like, oh my God, right? Like, here's this man who's revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person that seems like this morally good man, which is hard to find.
He's like just totally dreamy the way, shot that father in broad daylight. And, just so a lot of women are just, oh my. I mean, Taylor's in her 40s, being up all on this way younger dude. First of all, number two, I have to tell you why that's morally wrong and abhorrent. You are far beyond any kind of help whatsoever. And the way that these acts of violence are portrayed, as well, I mean, sure, when there's someone on the left that commits an act of political violence, it's really bad. But if they even say the, it's really bad part, but I mean, think of all the anger people are feeling. Oh, all of the that makes it okay to go out and do whatever it is that you want, because Chuck Schumer's not listening to you. And that kind of nonsense has found its way into every part of society. Carmelo Anthony, the guy who stabbed a young man at a high school track meet, allegedly in self-defense, was released on bail today. A judge dropped his bail from, what was it? I know the final was $250,000. What was it, like $1 million was the original bail, producer Nick? $2 million down to $250,000. That's a lot. Absolutely silly nonsense, and it's not getting any better at all. Now, we're going to talk about the way that the media has framed a lot of this political extremism, because this then turns into how CNN's day went today, which was just miraculous. Stick around, don't go anywhere, radio crew. We'll catch you in a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. So, Donnie O'Sullivan, who's, nodding along and, agreeing with Taylor Lorenz, saying all of the insane stuff that she's saying. Then later today, this is a special one, good old Donnie O'Sullivan interviews some individuals about political extremism, kind of in the news, some violence. And what his conclusion is beyond insane, and truly is a perfect picture of why there is such a disconnect in this country.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago.
America was found, make America great again to when they came and massacred the indigenous people, millions and millions of indigenous people.
But by supporting the murder of a healthcare CEO, doesn't that make your side as culpable?
I don't hear them condemning the Proud Boys, who he said stand by, whatever it is. Once they start condemning them, then I will reassess. But until then, no, I'm not reassessing.
Yeah.
About a third of the building has been blown away.
And while America's roots are soaked in bloodshed, violence in the country today is mostly from right-wing extremism. From Oklahoma City to Charlottesville to January 6th. There is simply no equivalent on the left.
I love there's simply no equivalent on the left. So first of all, he cites Oklahoma City. He's like, from this thing in the 90s to January 6th, there's no equivalent. And it's like, man, I don't see anybody rolling the footage of the shootings at congressional baseball games, or the trans shooting down in Nashville, or the political acts of violence against different congressmen and women, threats against SCOTUS, the 2 assassination attempts against President Trump. Oh, there's simply no equivalent. Oh, okay. Yeah. Forgive me for, not taking the idiot on CNN who's made similar nonsensical claims before. Again, the guy nodding along to Taylor Lorenz, good stuff. That all boils down to what occurred today when the President of the United States and the President of El Salvador met. And the way that CNN had to respond to this was truly amazing. One of the best, just for me, one of the best moments. Before we get to that, though, Bernie Sanders, all right, he's the head of the Democratic Party at the moment. Not actually the kind of socialist that burns down buildings, but the kind that tells you to fight the oligarchy and the capitalists with any means possible, maybe even including, a couple of Molotov cocktails. So Bernie Sanders did what all true socialist freedom fighters did. He went and spoke at Coachella, the music festival for rich kids in California. Tickets are between like $1,600 and $1,500 for just one weekend. For just one event, and different weekends it varies. So here's Bernie Sanders at Coachella. He's going to raise and rally the youth, and they're tweeting from their expensive capitalism. Oh.
Please give it up for Senator Bernie Sanders!
As a quick note, can you imagine paying for a music concert and then like the geriatric socialist gets out on stage? No, not Madonna. Bernie Sanders gets out on stage. Incredible. So he thanks, Claro, who is an artist. And then, of course, he praises like this random young congressman nobody's ever heard of, which is impressive. And then he starts talking about the oligarchy.
I want to say, this country faces some very difficult challenges.
Fight the oligarchy. Yeah, we're so amazing. Okay, great. Fantastic. We're going to pick up the radio crew from commercial and then dig in a little bit to today with the President of El Salvador and President Trump. It's a Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
So, CNN had a bit of a time today. So, Caitlin Collins, the sort of reporter, sort of anchor, sort of whatever, over on the beautiful White House coverage of President Bukele of El Salvador and, then, of course, the President of the United States having their in front of the media meeting. I decided to ask a little bit of question about this guy, Abrego Garcia, the individual that the United States removed too early. So he was scheduled on the list to be removed to El Salvador or just deported in general. And then it turned out that he was deported a little bit earlier and actually sent to El Salvador. And this turned into quite a bit of a flare-up with CNN, so much so that Dana Bash had to cut away and clutch the pearls to the extreme. So first of all, here's the spat with Caitlin Collins and President Trump.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please go ahead.
President Trump.
So Trump then, later goes on to say, I have no credibility. You kind of hate America, and that, of course, really gets the goat of the CNN crew. And so then Dana Bash has to cut in. So anytime an anchor, so first of all, as someone who's like scheduled for panels on different, television network TV shows, you're oftentimes in the waiting because there's some kind of a press conference, there's some type of a press event at the White House, at the Rose Garden or something else. And they're waiting for the end so that then you can come back in and then the panel's ready to go and to discuss what it is that, what we have learned today, that kind of a thing. And whenever you have an anchor that is so offended, they have to jerk everyone away from the press. It's a really bad look for the network because what happens? You're missing the rest of the press conference. But Dana Bash, here we go.
Press conference inside the Oval Office with the leader of El Salvador, Bukele, where we have heard a lot of bits of information, a lot of news nuggets that we want to definitely focus on, a lot of some misinformation as well. But we want to digest all of this right now with our terrific panel here and our reporters. Jeff Zeleny, I want to start with you. You are at the White House. Before I get to you, I just want to say, for the record, since we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office that CNN hates our country, CNN does not hate our country. That should go without saying.
Oh, it should go without saying. Man, why would anyone think that CNN doesn't like the United States of America? It's not like they've, time and time again affirmed with people that they have not only had on the network, but have staffed on the network, that they really don't like the United States. If only we had footage.
Here's a breaking news. We live in a racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic country.
Everything they're doing runs against making America great. Well, it was never great, so I'm not going to say the again part, but making America great.
Kicking off the Independence Day weekend, President Trump will be at Mount Rushmore, where he'll be standing in front of a monument of two slave owners and on land wrestled away from Native Americans, told that be focusing on the effort to, quote, tear down our country's history.
They strongly believe, these human smugglers, that this is their chance to enter the United States. This is their chance at the American dream. That's why they risk everything, only to find out that it's all a lie.
And when we got our freedom, our quote unquote freedom, we were never restored whole, which is why you hear about reparations. So until the United States atones for that and makes good on that, we're still living in a racist country.
I love it. Thank you very much to Newsbusters for that particular series of clips. Man, I don't know why anyone would think that CNN's full of it. Man, I just can't believe. So what if we actually looked at Caitlin Collins' question here? Let's not, shift away and talk about something else. Caitlin Collins asked, what about, this Abrego Garcia individual here who was removed from Maryland and then sent to El Salvador because of his alleged connection with MS-13. Well, Trump did one of the things that I like the best, and that's when he actually takes the question and pitches it to the expert in the room. I appreciate that, because that's, first of all, how you should do things. That's why you should have, various individuals in your cabinet whose shoulders you can stand on for particular issues. In this case, AG Pam Bondi.
Return the man who your administration says was mistakenly
Which one is
deported. The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
Okay, so this caused a lot of immediate proclaiming, the Trump administration is going to defy the Supreme Court. And we talked about this a little bit on the last show. That would be on Friday. But believe it or not, people didn't take any time over the weekend to read the ruling from the Supreme Court. I'm shocked. And by the way, this isn't just those on the left. It is now kind of the accepted dialogue in the way this has been described in kind of news media, that the Supreme Court ruled that the United States is to facilitate the return to the United States of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia back to the United States. That is not what the Supreme Court decision says. And I would like to remind everyone that if you read headlines instead of actually reading the court decision, and by the way, the Supreme Court, they actually have like court decision abstracts and SCOTUS blog. You can read the decision, the framing around it. You can actually check out some of the affirming and the dissenting opinions, if there are any on a particular ruling. You can read it for yourself. It's incredible stuff. Did the United States rule via the Supreme Court that the Trump administration has to return Garcia back to the United States? No. From the actual ruling, Supreme Court of the United States, number 24 Alpha 949, on March 15th, 2025, the United States removed Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia from the United States to El Salvador, where he is currently detained in CICOT. The United States acknowledges that Abrego Garcia was subject to a withholding order forbidding his removal to El Salvador, and that the removal to El Salvador was therefore illegal. The United States represents that the removal to El Salvador was the result of an administrative error. The United States alleges, however, that Abrego Garcia has been found to be a member of the gang MS-13, a designated foreign terrorist organization, and that his return to the U.S. would pose a threat to the public. And then, of course, they say Abrego Garcia responds, says he's not a member of MS-13. Okay, now let's talk for a second, because this is what the Supreme Court frames as these are the two sides. The Supreme Court then is going to say, here's how we rule. Now, as you've heard it today and over the weekend, from different pundits and anchors and correspondents from the White House and things, they've said, well, actually, the United States is told they got to bring him back right now. No, not the ruling. Next sentence. On Friday, April 4th, the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland entered an order directing the government to facilitate and effectuate the return of Garcia to the U.S. They then talk about Chief Justice Roberts' stay on that, and then the Supreme Court rules that the United States must be granted in part and declined in part. So what this means is, the intended scope of the term effectuate is that the Trump administration must effectuate his release from the El Salvador prison if possible, and then that's it. That's the whole ruling. And then if he's released from the El Salvador prison, to then hold some type of judicial hearing, because this isn't a grand trial jury thing. We'll talk about this in a second, actually, with Darren Smallcomb, a really great immigration attorney. We'll have to send the radio crew over to commercial, unfortunately. It's the Tony Kinnett cast. The rest of the reading, though, of the entire decision, I mean, from start to finish, never says that he has to be returned to the United States. Ever. Anywhere in the document whatsoever. And why doesn't he well, first of all, why does he not have to be returned to the United States? Well, because he's not a citizen or a legal resident of the U.S. He's not supposed to be here. You say, well, I mean, but he's married to someone who's supposed to be here. Doesn't that count? No. That does not automatically grant you rubber stamp status in the United States. That is not true. And for that matter, I do want to point out one other thing. He is a native of El Salvador. And in addition to being a native of El Salvador had warrants for his arrest for capital crimes in El Salvador. You say, well, but I mean, he was in the United States. Correct. And the correct position of the United States should have been to extradite him to El Salvador and wait a couple of seconds. They didn't do that. Administrative error. But now that he's in El Salvador, Bukele's not going to let him go. You know, well, how do I know that? Well, Bukele then answered the question from his perspective, and the media, again, did this. They took it completely out of context. They said, well, he doesn't have the power to return him to the United States. And they said, oh, so he's basically flipping off the Supreme Court. No. Here is the El Salvador president, Bukele, without any of the outside punditry.
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to not suggesting that I smuggle terrorists into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, I mean, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
Why doesn't he have the power? Doesn't he have the power to release someone from El Salvadorian prison? Yes, he does, but that wasn't the question. The question was, will you return him to the U.S.? He says, I don't have the power to send a person over the borders of the United States. He's an El Salvadorian citizen who is going to face justice in El Salvador. It doesn't matter how he got here, he's here. The president of France doesn't have the right to send someone over the border. He can offer him up for extradition to the United States if he wants to. His country would very much likely not care for that. But he can offer him up. But nothing in the Supreme Court rule says that he has to deliver him up to the United States. And by the way, the Supreme Court can't rule on the actions of El Salvadorian President Bukele. That's not a thing that occurred. Now, there are a couple of optics, a little bad language here from the President of the United States a little bit later. He talks about the idea of sending individuals who are citizens from the United States to El Salvador, like homegrowns is what he calls them. And that, in fact, is an error by the President of the United States. You can't do that. The President of the United States does not have the plenary authority to denationalize someone. Denationalization is, in fact, a thing. You can have your citizenship stripped from you in the United States. That takes a lot more than just the president waving a magic wand. And the president does not have the authority to just deport citizens to other countries. By the way, I don't think nor should we be deporting American citizens to other places. I think they should be dealt with here. They should just be dealt with correctly. Putting someone in timeout for 50 years, I do not believe is perhaps the most effective way of doing things. But this all requires fixing the legal immigration system here in this country long-term, not short-term. And to talk about that, we're going to head over to Darren over in the immigration attorney side of things, actually, digging with a legal expert. So Smallcomb's going to be up in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
The Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC. A couple of weeks ago, everyone was an expert on micro foreign policy in Europe. Then everyone was an expert on inflation. Then everyone was an expert on tariffs. And then everyone was an expert on immigration policy and judicial reform in the United States. Now, is that because they actually did any illegal training? No, they read social media posts. So to talk about some of those social media posts and how immigration law actually works, we've got on Darren Smallcomb, a great immigration attorney. Thrilled to have him. Thanks for hopping on with us, sir.
Happy to be here, Tony.
So let's dig in right to the most social media posts I've seen I don't have a series of constitutional law degrees, but I like to say that I've studied the Constitution, legal precedent enough to know that in the latest 9-0 SCOTUS decision about Abrego Garcia, that the left is now saying Trump has the authority to be like Julius Caesar, send Americans elsewhere, and then wash his hands of the affair. And he's defying the Supreme Court by not bringing this guy back to the United States immediately. Overblown, right on the nose. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's not really the case. I mean, they use the word facilitate. Yeah. It's not much of a shocker. And it's fun, as you said, to watch everybody go from experts from before COVID till now, where it's in my kind of field of expertise, which is immigration. This is interesting, though. The 1798 Alien Enemies Act is something that we've never seen in our lifetime, though it has been used in the past. And the last time that it was used was in World War II. And I believe that what the Supreme Court has, for the most part, done is kind of said, hey, look, we need to use a system like we did 75 years ago, where people are given some sort of administrative hearing prior to removal. That doesn't mean a full court hearing. That doesn't mean a full asylum hearing with the immigration court, which could take years. It is actually a administrative hearing, but at least something that preserves these people's rights.
So when you talk about preserving these individuals' rights, immediately everyone starts doing the pearl clutching routine. And I'm seeing it on both sides. And what frustrates me is the lack of knowledge or understanding when it comes to judicial proceedings of any sort. Everyone likes to imagine, and I shouldn't say everyone as though everyone listening to the show, I should say a lot of the hardcore activists getting out there, pouring out their hearts on social media. Whenever they think of a courtroom, it's usually with that, dun-dun, Law and Order courtroom scene, the judge is way up 30 feet in the air and then the counselor's walking around. And that's just not necessary. Not everything is a grand jury, massive trial meeting where you're asking your cousin to, tell you why tire tracks are in certain positions, especially not with some of these illegal immigration cases.
It's true. It is an adversarial process, but much of the time when you have a valid asylum case, and, we're proud that we do represent some asylum seekers, and we do have a very high success rate, about 80-90%, which is triple the national average, because we screen our clients to make sure that they fit into the categories that are permissible to grant asylum.
Whoa, wait a second here. I mean, you're telling me that before you suggest, hey, this person should be in the United States. I think this is a case where there is a situation in which, let's say they are a Catholic from Venezuela, where they might be hunted and brutally tortured, that actually might be, you vet the people that you are representing to join the country. What a concept.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept, to make sure that somebody has relief as sought out in the law and allowed and permissible through the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so we do look for people that a lot of religious persecution. So there's 5 categories. There's race, religion, national origin, political opinion, and being a part of a particular social group, which is sort of a catch-all, but it doesn't catch everybody. It doesn't catch economic migrants. And it doesn't just catch people that are looking for a better life. And
nor should it. You don't want people claiming things that aren't relevant to them.
Absolutely. And the problem is that we've seen over these last 4 years or so, and prior to it as well. I mean, it's not something that's exclusive to the last 4, but It's been very pronounced in the last 4, is that when you have legitimate asylum seekers like we represent trying to claim asylum in the United States, and the courts are bogged down for years, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 or more years with economic migrants and people that don't have a claim underneath the law, then the people that are truly disadvantaged are the ones that are trying to follow the law. And that's where, as an immigration attorney and very pro-immigration, I have an issue, because I want the people that are doing it right to be the preferred category of people that are being adjudicated.
And if you're going to look at these adjudications, in the future, one of the things that the Trump administration needs to do is not just set administrative precedent or just carry out a list of administrative actions by upholding the law. There was this conversation we didn't need new laws. We just needed a new president. And I agree with the sentiment of prosecutorial discretion, that a president does need to prosecute the law as the law was written to be upheld. but there are aspects of our immigration system in the long haul that need to be adjusted. Because when you think about, and you, again, more than many, the immigration system in this country, I do want people who share our values, who want to assimilate, who want to be a part of the community, who are going to be a benefit to it, like the vast majority of legal immigrants who become citizens in this country. That process needs to be not as bogged down by the courts, as you frame very correctly. What do you think are a couple of starter measures? Because you start talking about overhauling the illegal immigration or the legal immigration system, we'll be here all day. In fact, all week.
Right. So I look at two American values that I think that all Americans share, regardless of spectrum, which is that we should be the land of hope and the land of opportunity. Right. So this concept, as it permeates throughout the world, when America is looked at as this destination of freedom and rights and opportunities to maximize your potential as part of a society, I think this is extremely important for us to maintain this brand. So it's a two-tiered thing. Number one, the people that are the weakest in the world that need protection, right, need to have an opportunity. My idea on that has been to create some sort of 21st century Ellis Island where you can be vetted right there on the spot. So if you're coming to, let's say, even the southern border and saying, I just fled, I crossed halfway across the world, I need help, I'm going to be killed if I'm returned. Okay, let's do a 24-hour process where you have a hearing, your facts are looked at, and it's determined as to whether you would actually win your case or not and be granted asylum. Fair, okay? And if not, then you are removed, and that's it. It's done. So you have, number one, you have a fair process. Number two, you have a deterrent for people that are economic migrants that don't have a case because they're going to be turned away immediately. Not given a work permit, not allowed to be here for 5 years while their case is pending. It's an immediate decision. So that's part one, Tony. Part two is to be the land of opportunity. And one thing that's sorely lacking in the immigration system is a strong merit-based process. So, for example, you have a family in Britain that's disaffected right now by what's going on there. They want to come to the United States and continue their successful careers, raising their family, everything else within the United States. That opportunity really isn't there for the vast majority of that demographic, and it should be. We should have a system that encourages the best and the brightest from around the world to apply to live their lives in the United States, where we have shared values, shared opportunities, and that we all benefit by that. And this has to be, and I believe it will be, a part of the administration's rollout in the months and years to come. We have enforcement going on right now, but we have to have an attraction system as well to bring the best and the brightest to the United States.
I think that you've got a really strong point there. And one of the things that I want to focus in regarding the rest of the, kind of Western Europe, perhaps kind of the East Asian sphere, Pacific Oceania in general, where we're trying to seek our immigrants from. And the conversation usually gets sidetracked here as to, well, what kind of family values does a person have? And, then it gets into shady areas that have nothing to do with the value of a person whatsoever. What I do want to talk about is a lot of these nations like the UK, like Ireland, that are trying to crack down on citizens of their countries for recording members of the government. I mean, Ireland, over the weekend, they actually were recommending to Parliament that people be arrested for recording police officers, talking about cracking down on independent journalists. Do you think that the United States should play a role? Because we did in the 20s and the 30s, right, when they were victims of communist aggression and fascist aggression. Do you think that the United States should play a role in immigration, inviting those people to come to the United States and maybe get a temporary special protection?
Well, we've certainly granted it for less for other countries, and Britain is arguably our number one ally in the world. And so to give them some sort of opportunity to come here, I don't think it's an unfair idea as long as the people that were granting that opportunity are well vetted. And so, look, most of our ancestors, a lot of our ancestors in the United States came from Britain originally to escape such tyranny and such restrictions on speech and religion and other things like that. And it's not that much different now. And if you still have people of the same ilk that want to be in the land of the free and the home of the brave and start a life here instead, then I think they should be given an opportunity.
So if you want to take that forward and you want to take that further, I'm tired of seeing, congressional hearing. Again, this is kind of far out of our scope of something to solve instantaneously. You get then from these conversations that we're having right now, and then it ends up going into committee, right? So you get the House Immigration Committee in, and so we're going to start talking about these things. We get the testimonies in, and for some reason, the testimonies on both sides have nothing to do with what you and I are talking about.
Sure.
Those that are invited to testify, they yell about immigration and then safety, which again, very, very important. Obviously. And I say that smiling, as the Lake and Riley passed and people are now trying to claim that, it was a terrible thing. No, but I'm not seeing in the committee and I'm not seeing in the testimonies this kind of forward thinking immigration policy, right? Instead, I see a Republican representative talking just about the safety aspect. Again, still important. And then I see Jasmine Crockett making things up. What's the disconnect here?
Well, they're all grandstanding all the time and always running for re-election. They're looking for a soundbite to play to what they believe are low education constituencies. And it's unfortunate that these politicians don't give credit to their constituents as being intelligent and perceptive of the issues that are going on. But Tony, we need to have a system like this ultimately. I don't give Canada a lot of credit from a political standpoint, but they have a pretty good merit-based system where it's like, okay, how old are you? What's your background? What's your education level? Do you have children? Do you speak English? And they're going through this rating system to where somebody, if you have a high enough points at the end of the system, at the end, you could apply for their equivalent of a green card. It's a pretty good deal. And we need to have something like this because until we reestablish a birth rate that actually replenishes our population or grows our population, we're stuck with immigration. And, maybe that's a dire way to look at it. A lot of people do, but we need to make it a positive. We need to get the best of the world, not the opposite. And I think that we've had a huge influx of immigrants over these past years, and it's not ones that are going to contribute to our society, by and large, not all of them, of course,
right.
the way that we want. And we have that opportunity. America is still viewed as that bastion of freedom and that, that light in the world. And we need to maintain that and keep it going.
I think that you're pretty dead on there. And I don't get to say that all the time at the end of an interview, but I think that those perspectives, that actually submitting those things forward is a great step in the direction of fixing some of these things permanently, treating your constituents like they have a brain. Who knew? Right. Darren Smallcombe, where can we go to find out a little bit more about your work in immigration practice and law?
My company is called Modern Law Group. You could find the site at Law Office Immigration or Google my name. I've published a book and there's plenty of information out there about us. So if you'd like a little bit more info, feel free to look us up.
We'll link that in the description just because we like it. Thank you very much, Darren, for joining us. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Just a curbside prophet with my hand in my pocket.
Okay, I've been asked this question too many times. Normally, I would leave this completely alone, but I got about 8 texts today over this in general, and I'm tired of it. I'm not gonna stand for it any longer. This is unconscionable. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be put away for now and for good. I did not drop the Ohio State University's trophy at the White House today. I'm tired of seeing it. This is not me. No, that is not, no. That is Vice President J.D. Vance from Middletown, Ohio. I am Tony Kinnett from Middletown, Indiana. Get it right. Also, that's really funny to watch the NCAA trophy just disintegrate. I was, of course, as someone who truly despises the Ohio State University, being from Indiana and, having a soul, I do enjoy watching that occur. But, poor Vance. All right, let's talk optics for a second here. There are some silly optics, some fun optics. By the way, J.D. Vance did respond to that correctly. On X, he quote tweeted that later and said, I meant to do that. I didn't want anyone else to have it. If I couldn't have it, nobody was going to have it. That kind of good-natured response is what I would consider to be good optics. If you're going to be someone who is out there on the internet, then you need to be a good-natured person out there on the internet. If you are someone who is active online and you're like a mean, curmudgeon-y, obsessive person, that doesn't look too good. It looks like you're creepy. But when Vance just makes light of things and has a generally good time, it's seen as a pretty good optics thing. And the reason I bring this up is that there actually was a real question that I was sent in over the weekend that I didn't want to save until mail time. And it's from a guy named Jake, not Jake from State Farm. I'm talking about the other one. And Jake asked, what do you think the Trump administration needs to do to save its optics nightmare right now? And I totally disagree with the question, but we're going to answer it anyway. I do not think the Trump administration has an optics nightmare right now. Right now, you see a lot of people trying to spin an optics nightmare regarding the tariff situation, which, again, I think that a lot of American people are far more used to the chaos and people thinking and doing different things in the administration because Trump has never once said anything to the contrary. The illegal immigration issue is, in fact, an 80-20. The more information that comes out always looks worse for those against the actions of the administration because they don't. So Politico, for example, says that the Trump administration is facing pushback for getting rid of Maryland man. But Garcia is not from Maryland. He's not a Maryland man. He is from El Salvador. Unless you're talking about that famous Maryland city close to Baltimore, El Salvador. So the optics argument right now, let's talk about good optics and bad optics. So as for right now, the Trump administration largely has a pretty decent optics crew. And they have a pretty decent optics crew by not taking things too seriously. The most important thing that you can do when you are effectuating controversial policy, and by controversial, I mean between the two political parties. I don't actually mean between the 80-20 of society. Tom Homan's a great example of this. Tom Homan, border czar, the guy that is heading up the operation to round up criminal illegal aliens in this country and get them out of here. And so our Virginia Allen over at the Daily Signal got a chance over the end of last week, I think, to ask Tom Homan about, what happens if he gets canceled. And Homan's response was fantastic.
You can't cancel someone if they don't care. It's not that I don't care about what we're doing. I don't care what people think because you always have the haters. He said, where was the Atlantic when 500,000 kids were smuggled in this country? Where was the Atlantic when there's a 600% increase in sex trafficking because of the Biden administration? Where was the Atlantic? We had a record number of people on terrorist watch lists crossing the country, our border.
Correct. Just not caring. And the reason I point this out, there was another question at the end of last week that I didn't have time to get to, and I can't remember who it's from, someone with a lot of numbers at the end of their name. In my home state of Indiana. Now, this show is, in fact, first on the air in Indianapolis. Allison at the board in WIBC makes sure that it gets out to you guys. But because the show is broadcast to a lot of other markets now, in Arkansas, in Colorado, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Florida, and on, we try to keep the news a little bit more national. But something that I've learned in my short time in broadcasting is that a lot of local events are mirrored in other states with similar political environments. And right now there is a kind of a scandal or at least it's being treated as a scandal in Indiana politics. You've got state representatives and state senators arguing with constituents, and then the Braun administration because, property tax scandal, and spending money on a new GMC Tahoe and principles, and it's so terrible. No, it's not. And I gave some unsolicited advice to all parties involved. Touch grass. Relax a second. The only reason that small things turn out to be scandals is because you give them air. I will never, ever, 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 ever be a broadcaster who gets on and wastes your time by saying, breaking news today, the governor's second cousin once had a secretary who, according to secretive sources, was possibly stealing staplers from the State House in 1992. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Now, does that make any action out of any administration good or bad? No. But you can just issue a condemnation statement and then that be the end of it. You can fight for things without getting into the massive fist fight of taking certain issues to level 11 out of 10. Because then by the time that you get around to fighting a decent battle, like over property taxes, which a lot of us are paying way too much of, then all of a sudden it's, well, you freaked out about every other thing in this administration, from the kind of car you were driving to everything else, so why should I take you seriously now? Turns out when you cry wolf over everything, when the time comes for something to be taken seriously, like how this Abrego Garcia incident was handled. By immediately saying, this man is a saint, and he's amazing, he was just on the way to pick up his autistic child from school. How could the Trump administration do this? When things come out about Garcia, kind of shreds your credibility. We'll stick around for a touch of bonus tonus on the live stream. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, now that the radio crew is heading over to that sweet, sweet, beautiful commercial land, just to put a fine point on this with the left. Right now, there is a very core issue going on in the Democratic Party. And the reason I do a little bit of bonus tonus here, and this is just for this one thought, I promise. I was on, I think it was Newsmax today, and I had a co-panelist who was a Democratic strategist. Nice guy, but he was talking about the direction of the Democratic Party and what they need to do, and the Trump administration's not going to be able to handle governors like Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer or Jared Polis or J.B. Pritzker, I guess, in 2028. And the reason that they were kind of up for discussion at all is because over the weekend, Gretchen Whitmer was at this Trump White House governor event, and he invited Gretchen Whitmer, and he praised her. And so in response, Gretchen Whitmer, got out a couple of folders and put them over her face to hide from media photos. And it became a bit of a scandal because she was caught doing it. And the question that was brought up was, why would she do that? And the Democratic strategist did not have a good answer. His answer was, well, you don't really want to be seen around Trump, but it's also good that she's working with Trump, and so sometimes, the camera is just on you at the wrong time. Wrong answer. Survey says wrong. I guess the sound effect didn't quite play. Man, don't you hate it when that happens? I'm just too obsessive to leave that alone. Much better. Sometimes when you bend over backwards to make the optics argument that is both for and against the thing the person you were talking about is trying to do, that gets under my skin. I don't like that. I don't like that it's not happening and it's good that it is, and it's bad that she did that, but I'm glad that she did. No. Gretchen Whitmer and Jared Polis, although he's busy signing, anti-gun legislation and getting ready to classify not affirming your kid's gender change as child abuse because he's an idiot. Or you have Josh Shapiro on the Democratic side of things. It is advantageous in the swing state battleground places for blue governors to work with President Trump. Bashir down in Kentucky, for example. It is good for them, but there's a bit of a problem. And the problem is right now, the majority of the Democrat Party is not people who are the classic 90s labor voting bloc who got the left those swing states. The voting blocs who used to get Colorado and Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and even a little bit of possibly Kentucky for Democrats is for one reason and one reason alone. Old blue-collar union guys who wanted, no matter who was in power, they wanted their governor to be working with the administration so that someone could keep a hand on the steering wheel. So while the administration is trying to move policy in one way, this governor who worked with whatever president we had would be able to kind of say, hey, don't be too hard on the people in my state. That was the idea of purple politics, by the way, is that if you have a moderate who likes you and gets where you're coming from, they can steer or at least help from going too far one way or the other in an adversarial administration. And by the way, that's the role of Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer, is to try to do that for the Democrats in their state. But those constituents are long gone. Who are the constituents of the Democrats today? Those would, in fact, be the young progressives who are running around at Bernie Sanders' Coachella speeches, opening up for Carol. Tell everyone not to fight the oligarchy. Yeah, fight the oligarchy. Yeah. Throw a Molotov cocktail at a Tesla, or in the residence of the Pennsylvania governor. It turns out that whenever you make stupid decisions with who your constituency is, and then you give power to people who, well, quite honestly, look, like this, it turns out that it's really difficult to renormalize your party after you give it up to the furry, weirdo, creepy people. Just shocker. I know. It turns out that once you give the party to the one holding the Molotov cocktail, then they know they have the power. They're not going to give that up. That's ridiculous. By the way, you are finding this out to a much lesser degree over on the right. The populists in many states were given a levy of power. And so then all of a sudden, you can't actually back some things down. Arizona's facing this right now, right? Because Arizona keeps putting up in its Republican Party awful candidates. Awful candidates. There's no reason to put up awful candidates. But you ran Carrie Lake once, twice, as many times as necessary. And during the election, I was told, well, it's the polls. I mean, come on, Kerry's actually really popular. I mean, the polls are just saying that Trump is ahead, but the Democrat is winning for the governor position. And it was a little weird. And then, wow, golly gee whiz, the polls ended up being quite on the nose there. When you give party power to individuals who make bad choices, who are bad candidates. On the left, it's a massive problem. On the right, you just have some of the loony bin that get in there. You have some young ladies in Congress who, feel the need to shove their baby into every single interview they're doing. Because, they're a mom. And they can't just say, I'm a mom, and so sometimes I got to have my kid with me. Instead, it's, I got to shove my kid into every interview until you are left without any doubt that they are a prop for me to get my 15 minutes of fame. Or fighting in every congressional House hearing. Once you give them the power, it's hard to get it back. It's hard. It's difficult to return. And so what both parties need to learn, but I say that not like a both sidesism kind of a thing, because I hate the libertarian both sidesism argument. I think it's stupid. I think it's silly and disingenuous. What the right is actually in the middle of learning and has pretty much got it under the belt now, and the left is getting way worse on and needs to learn before it's far too late, although I think it's far too late, is that once you give the power to those who are nutso, it turns out they make nutso decisions. And so, the Democratic strategists can go, well, man, I think that Gretchen Whitmer should be working with Donald Trump. The second that she does, she will be ostracized from the party. And you will have people everywhere saying Chuck Schumer needs to be thrown out so AOC can take his place. And then they'll turn around and accuse you of the insider trading, like with Pelosi and Schumer and Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Because that's what socialists do. That's what they did in Russia. It's what they did in spades in China. And it's what they've done here 2 or 3 times. We'll be back tomorrow with a little bit more and hopefully some brand new information on the market situation getting into the week. Maybe that roller coaster is starting to flatten out a bit. We'll talk at you real soon. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.